Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're going to tackle all things batter. And in your textbook I cover different types of batter, and I also give you several recipes. But don't forget that you can find so many of our recipes both on our Instagram at Fuel Body Feed Soul and of course on the blog. In fact, the recipe that I'm going to do today, I discovered that I make all the time because of Instagram and didn't realize how often I make it. But it is my puff pancake. And puff pancakes are a pancake batter. So the only difference there, and Alex just gave me this word, viscosity, that's what determines different types of batter. So if you remember last week I talked about the great debate with chocolate chip cookie dough. Some people consider that a drop batter. A drop batter by definition is a thick batter but still pourable. So I always think more like a pumpkin bread, any kind of a quick bread, or like a cornbread. I think that cookie dough is kind of dough because you can't really pour it. But then this is a thin batter. So think waffles, Yorkshire puddings, pancakes, any of those type of batters, what we're going to do here. Also, your frying batters are a thin batter. I've got lots of recipes this week, so go and check them out. But for right now, I'm going to show you a couple of different baking techniques because I try to work that into each one of these lessons. I'm going to show you kind of the way to whisk that most people don't realize and that I actually learned when I lived in France. So I think it's pretty valid. It's one of the few cooking lessons that I've had. So we're going to go over that when we do it, and we're also going to go over making sure that the cast iron skillet is piping hot because that's part of the leavening agent that happens in this recipe. So today, in this, you'll find with all batters, typically what we have is wet and dry ingredients, just like we saw with the cookie dough. So what we're going to pour in here is room temperature milk, our 3 eggs, that are also room temperature. Very important. All of this is important for the lift that the puff pancake gets, that you don't have very cold ingredients. So 3 eggs. And when we go ahead and whisk this, so most people whisk right in a circle, and then you have some people that whisk in what's called a figure 8 pattern. But actually the best way to aerate and combine is a quick side to side motion. It's much quicker, much more efficient, and you can see from the air bubbles that it aerates very quickly. So side to side. If I had a bigger whisk just for comfort, I would be holding like this, but since I have this measuring cup and a smaller space and a smaller whisk, just side to side. And you can see how quickly that comes together. All of the yolks are gone, it's fully combined. So to my incorporated milk and eggs, I'm just going to add my 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract, just a little bit of flavoring. You don't have to add that, it's not necessary. And I'm going to add a little bit of salt. I'll give that a quick whisk just to combine that in. That's it for that. And then I'm going to add my flour. And if you remember last week I talked about sifting. And with drop batters or cookie doughs, it doesn't really matter for you to sift them. But for some more delicate baked goods, sifting is really important. So I'm going to sift the flour into this liquid mixture. Now, I don't have a sifter. My grandmother did, and I wish I knew where it was. You know, the kind with the turn handle, those beautiful sifters. I don't own one of those because it's an extra piece of equipment. So I actually just use this fine sieve, and I put the flour in, and then I just gently tap and get the flour to go in. So we'll go ahead and do that. Okay. So this is my grandmother's recipe. So in other words, it was her terrible handwriting, and I don't know how accurate it is. But remember I said to never dip and scoop flour? Guess what? My grandmother dipped and scooped flour because she does it heaping 2/3 of flour. So you just do a 1/3 cup, unless you can find a 2/3 dry measuring cup. I can't. You can see heaping just kind of over the edge. And then you can do this one of two ways. You can just gently tap, or you can shake it over and it'll sift the flour right in. I'll try to turn this to see if you can see it and not get flour everywhere. That doesn't work. I'm getting flour everywhere. Okay, we've got it down to the last little bit. I use my little rubber spatula. One more tip, don't have to get all of it out because the parts that didn't go in are the parts that are a little bit clumpy, so they shouldn't go in. So now I have this extremely light aerated flour sitting right on top of the wet ingredients. And all I'm going to do is stir that in until no clumps remain. So with a pancake batter, it does not have to be lump-free. In fact, when you read thin batter recipes, the majority of time they don't want it to be smooth. If it doesn't indicate smooth in the recipe, chances are they don't want it to be smooth. So you can see that I have some visible lumps of flour in there, and that's just fine. So we can go ahead and set that aside. Pancake batters, puff pancake batters, do better if they sit and rest for a few minutes before you pour them onto a hot skillet, or in this case into a hot skillet that goes into the oven and bakes. So it's better that that just sits for a few minutes. So we'll move to the oven preparation for a Dutch baby or a puff pancake. Alex is German, so my grandmother was German, so they called them puff pancakes. They didn't call them Dutch babies. Yeah, so, but they're the same thing. So I've got my cast iron skillet. So you would actually put this cast iron skillet into an oven that's been preheating and leave it in there and take it out piping hot. And then you would add your tablespoon of butter into it and leave it in there for about the last 10 seconds before you knead the pan. Swirl it around, take it out, scorchingly hot, and then pour the batter in. So we're gonna go ahead and pop this in the oven. We'll come back when it's nice and hot and the butter's already melted in it, and we'll pour the batter in. So I've got my skillet out of the oven. I'm gonna put that pat of butter in, and I'm gonna return it to the oven just for about 30 seconds for that to completely melt and make sure that the skillet stays hot. So you can see the butter's completely melted. I'm just gonna swirl it around to get the sides a little bit better. And then the key to all of this is quick. You wanna get this batter into the pan, pour it right into the center, scrape, getting all that goodness right into the pan, and then pop it into your oven. This is just a plain thin batter. I didn't doctor it up with peaches, apples, pears, cinnamon, anything, but all of that's there. This is the base, and you can add anything to it that you like. Great, so while that bakes, we'll go ahead and put together a drop batter for pumpkin bread. So I'll see you in a minute, and I'll get all of that set up. Okay. So the puff pancake is in the oven, puffing up and baking away, and so I'm gonna start on a drop batter, which is a quick bread, pumpkin bread, of course, and it is, Alex and I will tell you, about 1,000 degrees in this kitchen right now, so it does not feel like pumpkin season, but we're gonna proceed ahead anyway. So the key to batters, every single recipe is going to be dry ingredients in one bowl, wet ingredients in the other. So I've already, that's my dog. Hold on. So that's a lesson in when my dog barks, I answer. So we've got everything combined here, all of our dry ingredients, which typically for most quick breads is going to be a flour, a leavening agent, salt, and then of course whatever spices and seasonings that you want in that quick bread. For pumpkin bread, you can imagine it's cloves, nutmeg, she's getting the dog, cinnamon, and a little bit of ginger. So all of that is whisked to combine. So instead of sifting it together, I just combined it in a bowl, whisked it to aerate it, and I'm gonna set it to the side. I've already got my 2 cups of sugar and my room temperature butter in my stand mixer. So I'm gonna go ahead and cream that. Like I said, in baking, creaming butter and sugar, if there's any technique you take from the textbook, it's properly creaming butter and sugar, because you're cutting the sugar into the butter. So the butter is a fat and the sugar is a crystalline structure, which is like small tiny knives. And as we cut it into the fat, it creates air pockets. And those air pockets, when they get into the oven, are what create your lift and your rise, so something doesn't rise too high and then collapse, doesn't rise at all and spreads. So that's going to go for about 3.5 minutes. A little bit less today because it's warm in this kitchen, but when we get to the baking lesson where what does this look like, I will show you properly creamed butter and sugar, and then you can just look at it and know. Okay, so my butter and sugar is properly creamed, and now I'm going to add an egg like you do in almost all batters. The good thing is in baking, once you learn a technique, it's pretty repetitive. So I know, my weird egg habit. That's a reflection of being taught to cook by my grandmother, by the way. So we're going to add those. Just incorporate them. Don't want anything to get tough. Don't want to overmix anything. So those are just incorporated. And then just like we did with the chocolate chip cookie dough, we're going to add the dry ingredients, all of the flour, the salt, the leavening agents, the spices, in about thirds. And after each one, we're going to stop before it's fully mixed, because we want it to just be incorporated. Now, if you're using a stand mixer, actually if you're using a handheld mixer, I just haven't used one in a lot of years. When you start on the lowest speed, otherwise you're going to get a face full of flour and look somewhat like Lucille Ball. If you're really young and you don't know who that is, please look her up. She is worth it. Watch an episode. So that's just incorporated. There's still streaks of flour visible because I don't want to overmix. We'll add our next bit. This is going to be one where I'm going to stop and I'm going to scrape down the sides of the bowl because I have a little too much flour that's collecting around the sides, and I don't want to overmix in an attempt to get something that just won't get caught by the mixing whisk. There we go. Just incorporated. And then we're going to put in our last bit of dry ingredients. Scrape down again. Make sure that we get all that flour off the side. And that's all mixed and combined. So I'm just going to tidy up a bit before we add the most important ingredient, our pumpkin. So my batter up to this point is all made. It's light and fluffy, and I'm going to go ahead and add my pumpkin mixture. So the good thing about most pumpkin recipes is it's always going to tell you just a full can of pureed pumpkin, and you can get any kind that you like. Just make sure that when you go to the grocery store, there's two kinds. There's pureed pumpkin that's pretty much available year-round, and then there's pumpkin pie mix, and that already has seasoning and flavors incorporated into it. So if you're baking something that doesn't call for pumpkin pie mix and you add it, you might get too much clove, too much nutmeg in it, so just watch out for that. If I did have to measure this, let's say this recipe was really mean and it said a smaller amount than what comes in a full can of pumpkin, which is annoying because then you have to throw out the rest. This would be measured in a dry measuring cup, not a liquid. So that's just information for you to remember. Something that has the consistency of sour cream, yogurt, or a pureed fruit is going to be done in a dry measuring cup. And I will give you a tip. If a recipe calls for less than a full can of pumpkin puree, that recipe should not be used. It's not your friend. Now I'm trying to think if I ever wrote a recipe that does that. So our batter is all mixed. One of the things I just want to point out when you're doing a pumpkin batter is if it looks a little grainy or a little curdled, that's fine. It's just the puree and the fiber that's in the pumpkin, so don't worry about that. And as you can see, we're going to pour this into a pan. Now, here's the thing about batters like quick breads. They are completely translatable as muffins. They can be made into any size that you want. The difference is the cooking time. So you will start to get into your head, whereas a quick bread in a normal loaf pan is going to take anywhere from 60 to about 75 minutes. If I was to do these in a muffin tin, like the normal kind of size muffins, it would take about 18 to 22 minutes. If I was going to do mini muffins, it may take 12 to 15 minutes depending on the size. But you can translate this batter to any type size loaf or tray that you want. You don't need a specific muffin batter. The other thing, and I didn't say this with the chocolate chip cookie lesson, but Alex had said it back when we filmed that lesson, that she adds toffee bits. This is a base batter, just like the puff pancake. You can add nuts, chocolate chips, toffee bits, butternut crunch, anything that you want to add to it, you can go ahead and add that in. But if you want to add any fresh fruit, make sure that you dust it in flour first, otherwise all the fruit's going to settle to the bottom of the baking tin rather than being distributed throughout the dough. The flour helps suspend it within the batter. So I'm going to prepare my baking dish. This is how I grease baking dishes. The butter that I used, I take the wax and I grease the pan. I don't usually use sprays. This is a recipe that calls for dusting the pan with a little bit of flour as well. All of this is to help the stick. So good. So now it's lightly floured. You could also line this with parchment paper. That would work brilliantly. 2 sheets of parchment paper, and then you can just lift the parchment paper out and you don't have to worry about it sticking at all. But I wanted to show you that technique with the greasing and the flour. So you can see the difference. This is a drop batter. It's thick and it drops, but it pours. So just getting everybody riled up into that batter dough debate. So you just want to smooth it. And then I do something with all my quick breads and everything. I do that just to settle it and pop it in. I like my doughs about 2/3 up the size of the pan, as well as my muffins. If I was to pour this or scoop this into muffin tins, I would like it about 2/3 of the way up. So this is the end of our batter lesson. I'm going to go ahead and pop this in the oven. In this size loaf pan, it will take about 60 to 75 minutes. So we'll be eating it later, but we're not going to make you wait around to watch that part. So get to making batters. They're the basis of all baking. It will get you confident and ready to tackle much harder projects. And if I was going to give you a rule of thumb with batters, I would tell you to either start with a pancake batter or to start with a fry batter, because those are your easiest ones, and you'll see that every batter is just repetitive and builds on the next one. So that's it for this week's cooking lesson. We will get together again next week when we tackle bread, and I'm going to take you through my basic pizza dough and a rustic loaf bread with a shaggy mask stage and all the things you need to know about how to look, smell, and see bread so that it's perfect. Thanks.